Hello again, I'm Doug Smith. This is the 14 March 2014 edition of Portsmouth This Week, the voice of Portsmouth Town Hall. My guest today is Sgt Scott Travers of the Portsmouth Police Department. Welcome, Scott. Welcome back. You've been here before, so.
Yes, thank you for having me again.
And Scott's going to be discussing traffic safety, and actually it sounds like something that everything's been said about, but obviously there are a lot of issues going around out there. And, you know, it's driving safety or traffic safety is much bigger than just Portsmouth. But what kind of particular problems do we have in town?
Well, Portsmouth, like every other community, we have just about the same issues. Speeding, of course, statistically is our #1 traffic violation in Portsmouth, but we do have other issues, again, like distracted driving, people using portable devices while they're driving. Older drivers as well can be a concern, as well as teen drivers who don't have a lot of experience on the road.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in the distracted driving thing because we all see it every day. You know, you drive at the intersection and the light changes and the guy's sitting there talking on his cell phone or texting somebody. What are the rules about that? And from a police standpoint, how can you tell if somebody's texting while driving?
Right. Well, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, or NHTSA, has various statistics on different things. And what they have is in 2012, they said there were over 3,000 fatalities across the United States due to distracted driving. So it is certainly a concern. And distracted driving, according to NHTSA, is defined as using a portable device or a handheld cell phone while driving.
Okay, so that includes the use of cell phones then, generally.
Correct.
For distracted driving. What happens if you find somebody that's kind of acting strangely in the car, you as a police pull them over, and you say, you know, what are you doing, sir? And if the guy swears he wasn't texting, he doesn't have the telephone or the device in his hand, how do you prove he's texting? I always thought that was something that would be very difficult for you guys to prove enough to prosecute a case.
Right. Now, the way the statute is written, it's the definition for use of a portable device is actually having the device in your hand. So that's just the way the statute is written. So therefore, you don't really have to prove.
So people usually have it in their hand?
Right. If you have it in your hand, sometimes, you know, that would be just enough. Now, when you see the vehicle in motion, if you happen to see the operator, if you can actually, you know, articulate that I saw them texting. Yeah. Some signs of people driving while distracted or using portable devices would include weaving in and out of their lane of travel, crossing the double yellow lines into oncoming traffic, or like anything else, being distracted, just not actually paying attention to the actual task of driving their vehicle.
Yeah, the one that really upsets a lot of people is, like I say, at a light. You're waiting at a light, you wait. Finally, the light turns green, and the person in front of you is sitting there.
Right.
Not paying any attention, so that's distracted driving right there. Now, what are some of the penalties associated with this, or what happens if you get caught?
Right, if you get caught. Now, as far as citations go, you can cite somebody for distracted driving, but at this point, police, I believe, are still more in the line of giving warnings for distracted driving. However, you can issue them a pay-by-mail fine for that. But again, texting while driving is prohibited for everyone, but cell phone usage in Rhode Island, the way the statute is written, is prohibited for people who are under the age of 18 or juveniles.
Okay, so it's okay for me to use my cell phone while driving, even though, of course, again, I know I'm distracting myself by doing it, but it happens. You get a phone call. I happen to have Bluetooth in my car, so I can drive, but still you're kind of distracted. What would you recommend that people, when they get a phone call, pull off the road or into a parking lot to talk?
Right. I would recommend people pull off the road, get out of the path of travel, out of the lane of travel in the roadway, pull over and use your device.
Yeah.
Now, NHTSA does have a 3-phase program that it's a voluntary program that they're planning on implementing. The first phase of that is going to be with the vehicle manufacturers for technology inside of the vehicle to disable certain features on different devices. Say, for instance, your vehicle comes with a GPS navigation system. That system will be able to tell when the vehicle is in motion, so it will disable the feature for you to actually input destinations. So that'll help, you know, prevent you from distracted driving because that won't be able to function. The second phase of that would be for the manufacturers of these devices, cell phones, iPods, and other portable devices. As we all know, many of them have GPS features in them now. So they will also
Devices themselves.
Right, the devices themselves, yeah. So if they're in motion, traveling at certain speeds, they won't be able to be manipulated as well. So they'll disable some of their features, such as a texting feature on a cell phone. As long as the cell phone is in motion, you won't be able to text. And that would certainly prevent it as well.
Yeah.
The third phase of that would be actual human-machine interfacing, which is a few years off. But again, if we go back to that GPS feature in your vehicle, we'd look at that and say, rather than actually inputting or touching with your hand to try to input a destination into your GPS, you'd just be able to speak to the GPS and tell it what destination you want to go to.
You know, I think that's all noble of the car companies, but I also see these guys advertising electronic equipment in cars that'll keep you in touch with all your friends on Facebook and I'm trying to think to myself, can you imagine driving while trying to do Facebook or something? It's ridiculous.
Right.
So it's kind of like they're being drawn two ways here. One to make money to sell cars, and the other one for safety.
Correct.
The other one that's interesting, though, is I've seen a few ads about this new technology where the cars themselves actually sense something going on. I'm not exactly sure how that works, and it's got to be quite a ways off. But is that part of the...
Right, that's all part of that program from NHTSA to help drivers make the right choices, and in cases where they may not be making the right choices, make the equipment that they're using safer for them to operate.
Now, how would this thing work about your car sensing that there's somebody stopped up there, or how does that work? I mean, does that link up? Is there some kind of communications between the cars?
Right, now there are a couple of different ways that something like that can work. There can certainly be a sensor device in the front of the vehicle to sense objects, whether or not they're maintaining the same distance away from you or whether they're getting closer. And there is also technology where GPS units themselves can talk to each other. And I know there are certain GPS devices that do this communicating amongst themselves, and they'll actually reroute you a different way to get to your destination.
If you have traffic. Yeah,
based on traffic, right.
Yeah, so technology's got a lot of possibilities here for helping us out.
It's almost like the Jetsons.
Yeah, almost. We don't have jetpacks yet, though.
Right.
We're working on it. The other major issue that I see here in Portsmouth, and I think everybody does that drives here on our East or West Main Road, is aggressive driving. People getting in there. They have to be at work. They left late. You know, they're passing people on the right. I have to say I've been guilty of that once or twice only, but you know. And what's interesting to me is how do you look at that? How do you define aggressive driving? How is it defined under the law? And how does it become, like instead of just plain speeding, how does it become aggressive driving?
Right. Now, NHTSA would define aggressive driving as committing multiple traffic offenses so as to endanger property or persons. And under Rhode Island general law, it's defined as speeding with a combination of two other offenses. So, for instance, speeding along with interval between vehicles, which is following too close, or tailgating, weaving in and out of your lane of travel, which is laned roadway violations, again, crossing into oncoming traffic over the double yellow lines, red light violations, stop sign violations, school zone violations, all those things. Again, the important thing is speeding and two other violations would constitute aggressive driving.
Okay, now, what are some of the penalties for that? I mean, is that a serious offense? Is that...
Yes, it is looked very seriously by the traffic court judges. So there certainly would be enhanced sanctions. They can potentially be monetary or license suspension for a period of time, perhaps driver retraining.
Yeah. I imagine that's something you're looking forward to have the traffic court actually in Portsmouth, which apparently we're going to at some future time. It'll probably make it a lot easier for you guys to appear in court to testify if you need to.
Right, indeed. Now, currently, Portsmouth is serviced by the Rhode Island Traffic Tribunal in Wakefield.
Yeah, that's what I understand. So you have to go there, I guess, if you have to testify, right?
Correct.
And that takes you away from Portsmouth for several hours anyway.
It does, yes.
Yeah, okay. You know, I've often wondered, some people, and sometimes it's out of aggression themselves, I guess, does it help for anybody else that sees aggressive driving? They look behind them and they see this guy weaving between. Does it help to beep your horn or wave at the guy? Or does any of that help? Or is it better just to say, stay away from this guy?
Right. Now, the police would always recommend you don't engage these people. We don't want to spark a road rage incident.
Yeah.
You don't know who the other person is or what's going through their mind or what their motivations are. The best thing would be to let that person pass you, and if you're in your right faculties and your right state of mind, you can always keep an eye on them and watch their driving and avoid them. You certainly don't want to block them in behind you, because if they're not paying attention or driving aggressively, you certainly don't want to have them hit you. The best thing to do in those cases would be to just obtain all the information you can on the vehicle. Think to yourself, if you were the police officer responding or wanting to investigate that vehicle, what information would you want? You'd want the make, model of the vehicle, the color, if there's anything particular about the vehicle. If it was a pickup truck, did it have large ladder racks or a particular company's sign or logo on the side? The vehicle registration. Even if you can't get the vehicle registration numbers, even just the state alone might help us out, you know, as well as direction of travel and where you are. So that way responding officers will know where to go, where they could potentially intercept the vehicle, and exactly what they're looking for.
Well, I think the main thing is don't engage. I think that's probably good advice, because as you say, you never know whether this guy's a wacko, just escaped from somewhere, or what his problem is.
Right, yeah, I mean, it could be someone with just a medical issue. You know, you don't know.
Yeah, so that's good advice, even though sometimes we feel like shaking our hand or something at folks like that. Another problem, and one we talked about before the show here, is impaired driving. We usually think of alcohol primarily, but I think drugs and marijuana specifically might, you know, become an issue at some point. How is impaired driving under the law? How is it defined?
All right, now, impaired driving, just to throw out another statistic, according to NHTSA, in 2012 there were 10,000 fatalities across the United States due to impaired and drunk driving. Correct. It's something that's completely preventable. I know there are a lot of programs in effect to try to help curb that. I did just hear recently about a program in Providence, you know, where they're having designated drivers and for certain establishments, which I think is fantastic. But again, a lot of people will think if they haven't consumed alcoholic beverages to excess, that they think they're fine to drive. But of course, we all know that that's not true. The same thing is true for prescription medication. A lot of people will take various prescription medications for their needs, and if it says on the bottle, don't operate heavy machinery,
that's a car.
You know, clearly that's a car. Yeah, you know, you don't want to endanger yourself or other people as well. Now, the penalties or sanctions for impaired driving, of course, it depends on the circumstances of the case, because every case is different, and it would depend on the level of impairment on behalf of the person. If the vehicle was stopped as a result of a traffic stop, or if it was the operator was encountered due to an accident involving property damage, perhaps personal injury, serious bodily injury, or even in extreme cases, if it's a fatal car crash, you know, there are certainly a range of penalties that would be involved. They would generally all include some type of license suspension, community service, a course on driving while intoxicated, or substance abuse, and in extreme cases, possibly imprisonment.
Yeah, so it's a serious, it's taken very seriously, I know, by the police department and the state police, I assume, too.
Correct, right, and the court system as well.
Yeah, to keep an eye on this stuff. And of course, we live in an area that there's a gigantic tourist pull down at the southern end of the island, and so we get a lot of people floating through here after they've been in Newport for several hours. I guess that can be a major issue. What about marijuana? I know the chief was on a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about some of the problems associated, like with alcohol. There are chemical tests. There is the breathalyzer. There are these other, I guess, tests you can do. How does that work for marijuana? Or because it seems like there's a big difference between proving, you know, showing someone's high on marijuana to the point where they're impaired, and alcohol. So how would you do that? As you drove up to somebody, they open the window, you get a whiff of something.
Right.
So what do you do then?
Well, when it comes to prosecution, okay, when we look at a driving while impaired or a driving under the influence charge involving drugs as opposed to alcohol, as we all know, there are two tests a police officer can request when he believes that an officer is driving while impaired. The first test, as you mentioned, is the breathalyzer, which tests for alcohol content. The second test would be a blood test. So if the officer believes that an individual is operating a motor vehicle under the influence of drugs, the test he would request would be a blood test.
Okay.
And rather than being transported to the police station, that operator would be transported to the nearest hospital. And that's where the officer would request that the individual submit to the chemical test.
Okay, now would something show up from marijuana and or prescription drugs?
Right. Now, in Rhode Island, under the general laws that we have, the amount of blood or the blood alcohol content level is defined within the statute, either 0.08, 0.08 to 0.10, 0.10 to 0.15, or 0.15 and greater. Now, there aren't any delineated statutes for levels of drugs in one system. Okay? The blood test can detect different levels of drugs in one system, which would be weighed by the court, but there aren't any specific levels to define impairment. It would be prosecuted the same way as a DUI case without blood alcohol content.
Okay, so it'd be based on observations, based on the way they can walk, and
right, based on how they performed the field sobriety test, and again, based on the incident itself. You know, if it was an accident involving property damage, serious bodily injury, or anything else. Yeah. So those circumstances would come into play as well.
Do you think over time here, as more and more states and towns are authorizing, for example, medical marijuana, do you think they're going to come up with new tests in the future for things like that? So it'll be more definitive, you know. But
well, I'm not sure that different tests would be needed. Perhaps in the statute, they may come up with a definition of impairment as, you know, analogous to the blood alcohol content. Right. They might come up with a, you know, content of blood with whatever particular drug. That may come up, but I'm unaware of that being on the table for legislation at this time.
Yeah, it just seems like it would make it difficult. You know, I'm trying to think like a lawyer, and all the ways out and everything. And I would assume the same penalties that would apply to someone impaired for any reason.
Correct.
The same penalties as under alcohol impairment.
Correct, and that's the way the statute's written.
Yeah, and
driving under the influence of intoxicating liquor and/or drugs.
Yeah. I didn't realize that older drivers were a problem until I read your little, you know, your thing you sent me earlier, and I'm one of them. You know, I'm an older driver. What are some of the key issues relating to older drivers that you find?
Well, again, NHTSA did a study on this, and in 2011, there were over 5,000 fatalities across the U.S. Involving older drivers. And if we consider ourselves, as we get older, you know, our body changes. Our eyesight may not be as keen as it once was. Our sense of hearing may not be as sharp as it once was. And even our reaction time. So all things that are important when it comes to driving.
Yeah. One of the things, though, that I'm very much aware of, and most elderly people are, is that driving represents independence. I mean, you almost have to have a car in this country to be able to get around. And what are some of the things that we can do to try to stay safe? I mean, over time, how do we counteract the normal tendency to just, you know, sort of pay less and less attention? What can we do?
Right. Now, AAA does offer a fantastic course on older drivers, which I would recommend. I don't have a schedule of locations or times.
Yeah, they could call AAA.
Right, anyone can call AAA or go onto the internet and search AAA for that information. But signs that you should you know, look for either in yourself or in your loved ones would include failure to maintain you know, control of the vehicle. If you notice that someone you know or one of your loved ones is unable to stay within their lane of travel. Again, the same things we talked about with distracted driving. You know, if they're going towards oncoming traffic, if they're unable to make a turn and stay in their lane of travel, perhaps getting on or off the highway causes extreme confusion for them, or even just getting lost in places where they would normally drive or places they should be familiar with. Those are all signs where we may start to, you know, evaluate whether or not that person should still be driving.
I would guess, too, that the safest thing for somebody that starts experiencing this, if, let's say they pull onto a freeway and all of a sudden they think, where the heck am I, you know?
Right.
The best thing for them to do is pull over or pull off until they can think it through, or else call for help.
Right,
you know, it's going to be very scary if this comes upon you somewhere. But I'm glad that some of these people are having courses. AARP, I think, does similar things online. They're free, that you can take to improve your perception and things like that. On the flip side of this is teenage driving, which you mentioned. What are some of the issues there? I mean, it seems to me that one of the statistics you sent me seem to indicate that we're doing better in that area in terms of accidents, but what does it look like?
Right. Well, with teen drivers, again, in 2011, there were over 4,000 fatalities, which is a large number across the U.S. involving teen drivers. But taken in perspective, that's down 50% from 2002. So it seems like we are improving in that area, but overall, teen drivers account for 5% of the overall population of people driving in the United States, but they account for over 15% of the total fatal accidents that we have. So again, teen drivers, they're more likely to engage in risky behaviors. They have the least experience driving, so there are concerns.
Yeah, I know when I was a kid, we never had driver's ed. Driver's ed was my father showing me how to drive the car, and then it was hands-on after that in a parking lot. But I think the driver's ed courses probably help, the ones they have in school. And what are the rules about, at what age can a kid legally drive in Rhode Island?
Right now, it starts out at age 16, and it's a progressive license system. So I would say that if you're driving in Rhode Island, okay, if you're a young driver, certainly stick to all of the rules. Don't have too many people in your vehicle. Drive during the hours you're supposed to be driving. Don't go outside of that at all, because if things do go wrong, if you're stopped, if you commit a vehicle violation or anything, certainly license suspension can be something that's coming up. Don't drive on your permit without someone with a full license with you. You can just get into a lot of trouble that way.
So at 16, did they get a license or a permit?
Your permit.
Okay, and then when do they get a license? At 17, if?
Correct. If there are no violations, if nothing has occurred. So.
Okay. It's kind of interesting that teens cause less deaths than elderly people. It's kind of scary to me.
That's correct.
Yeah. And then going even younger, let's talk a bit about seatbelts and the use of child restraints. Mm-hmm. Child restraints have gotten very sophisticated, it seems like, in the last several years. What are the regulations about this? For example, how old should a child be before it can sit in a seat with a seatbelt without a child seat?
Right. Now, in Rhode Island, there are three numbers to keep in mind. Okay, 8 years of age, 57 inches in height, and 80 pounds in weight. Anything below any of those three numbers.
So it's not age; it's size, essentially.
Right. Age and size as well. Anything below those three numbers still has to be in some form of child protection seat.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if we look at NHTSA, they have a 4-step program that goes from birth, all the way up to adult. And step 1 of that program would be for your newborns, and that's rearward facing in a child protection seat with a 5-point harness. Step 2 would be forward facing, also in a child protection seat with a 5-point harness.
Okay.
Step 3 is the use of a belt positioning booster seat, which is just that. A child who is grown and developed, not quite to the status of an adult, but a child that's a bit larger, doesn't quite fit properly in that seat of the vehicle with the lap and shoulder belt, over the strongest parts of the body. So you need that belt positioning booster to boost the child up to fit properly.
Okay, but it's using the regular seat belts.
Correct. Using your standard shoulder and lap belt.
Okay.
Okay. And then, of course, step 4 would be the use of just the lap and shoulder belt as an adult.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of my grandson. I've got a grandson, Orion, who's a year and a half old, and he's still in that backwards seating thing.
Right. Now, we should keep in mind, if we look at that 4-step system, the safest way to transport your child in the vehicle is rearward facing with a 5-point harness. So parents and caregivers shouldn't try to rush out of that to get them forward facing or into a booster seat. The longer you keep them
the safer it is.
Right, the safer it's going to be.
Sure.
And there was a standard to say that at 1 year and 20 pounds, we would change that child safety seat around from rearward facing to forward facing. That standard's starting to change now. Now we're recommending up to 2 years rearward facing, and the weight limit to the upper weight limit of that child protection safety seat in use.
That makes sense anyway, because it does make sense that they're safer facing the other way.
Right. Yeah. Keep them safe as long as possible.
Speaking of that though, just seat belts. This click it or ticket campaign with the state police has been on televisions everywhere. Is that working out pretty well? I mean, I found in my lifetime that what you have to do is make it a habit to immediately put your seatbelt on. That's the only way you can remember it all the time. Of course, the cars help you these days because they beep if you don't put them on. Is that working? Are you finding less and less of problems with people with seatbelts, or How's that working out?
Yes, more and more people are using seatbelts today. It is becoming more and more of the social norm, so that is fantastic. And according to AAA, seatbelts, shoulder belts, and lap belts are saving people up to 50% over fatalities and serious injuries.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I'm constantly amazed because I keep seeing people that they die in a relatively small accident. A car runs into a tree at 30 miles an hour, and they're dead because they went flying through the windshield because they weren't buckled up. It just seems so obvious a thing to do. But again, I think you have to get into the habit of doing it all the time, you know?
Correct.
Probably, like a lot of these things. Just another issue, and I've always wondered what the right answer to this is. What happens if you're stopped? You know, let's say your taillight's out. Let's say it could be anything. Let's say you passed on the right and you went right by a police patrol. You got caught. What should we do to show the officer? So we pull over the side of the road, the officer's car is behind us. What do we do to show that we're not a threat, that we want to cooperate? How should we behave?
Well, the first thing I would say, no matter where you're stopped, illuminate the interior of the vehicle if it's dark out. Just turn on the interior lights. It's going to help the officer see into the vehicle, and it's also going to help you out to get the proper paperwork, you know, together for the officer. Have that paperwork ready when the officer approaches. Your driver's license, your current insurance card for the vehicle, and your current registration for the vehicle.
Right. So, see, I think I've been watching too many TV shows, because the idea of reaching over into my glove compartment as the officer walks up, I've seen too many of these TV shows where the guy reaches in for a gun and shoots the guy, and I don't want the officer to think I'm doing anything like that. Should I wait until he asks me to do that?
No, it's fine to have that stuff ready for the officer. Again, I would tell people, you know, don't keep all of your old insurance cards in your vehicle.
I know,
it's just clutter.
yeah,
You know, a lot of people do that. All of your old registrations. Just have, you know, the most current ones available. That way it's easy for you. And usually when the police officer pulls you over, he's not going to just jump out of his car and run right to you right away. He's going to be running the plate. Yeah, you're going to have a minute while he contacts his dispatcher, lets him know where he's at and what's going on.
Okay, so that's, and then do things slowly, I guess. Don't jump around, and don't get out of the car unless they ask you to.
Correct, yeah. You know, keep your hands in plain sight, keep them on the steering wheel or where the officer can see.
Okay, that's all good advice. One of the things that the police department has started doing in Portsmouth that I think is great is using Facebook to just put out general interest things. I mean, have you found any use for that, for traffic safety tips or ideas? Have you used that at all? It might be something you could do.
Right. Now, I personally haven't. We do have an officer at the station that's in charge of our webpage. All the information on child safety seats, that's all on our webpage in case parents or caregivers have any questions about that. And you're right, though. Social media is a wonderful thing. We can put out a lot of great information.
Yeah, and I'd like to see more of that. I think it is a valuable tool for getting the word out, but also both ways, because you can use it to get information in as well. One of the issues in Portsmouth, and it kind of relates to traffic, is the idea of pedestrian safety as well. On East and West Main Road, it's difficult at best to cross the road. Our pedestrian walkways seem to me they're not very well marked, or they're not. You know, nobody's calling attention to these things. Is there anything we could do? For example, the one over by Clements, you know, that crosswalk that goes over to the bank from Atria, I guess it is.
Right.
That seems to me to be a very dangerous place, because people are coming down the road at 40 miles an hour. They're going home from work. It's dark. What can we do to improve pedestrian safety there?
Well, again, that's something not so much that the police department can do, but we need more infrastructure in that area. Yeah. It'd be great to have more lighting in that area, perhaps more signage or a pedestrian cross light there. That might be helpful.
So more money maybe would help.
Perhaps.
Okay, Scott, thanks very much for coming in today. And this is Doug Smith signing off. We'll see you in the next edition of Portsmouth This Week.